Danny and Michael Philippou did it, man. A few years after the amazing Talk to Me, they successfully ripped Sally Hawkins, aka Mrs. Brown, from the Paddington series to have her star in their sophomore film Bring Her Back. And was this movie intense. The story is simple as it follows a brother and sister who, after tragedy strikes their family, they go to the secluded home of their new foster mother only to live out something worse than their worst nightmares. This was easily one of my most anticipated movies of the year since I've been a fan of Raka Raka for many years. Apologies if I mispronounced it, but I've always loved their hilarious over-the-top skits, and I'm a huge fan of their debut feature film Talk to Me. I find it so fascinating that nowadays it's so hard for filmmakers to successfully create an original concept. Like, even within the films that are more recent that are praised as being originals, there's always something derivative about them. Whether it's the filmmakers themselves that revere other work or felt so inspired by something else, no matter how small, and just end up including it in their work anyway. And that's not a groundbreaking conversation piece. Movies from the dawn of time have always been copying off of other stuff. It's why remakes are especially scrutinized because of the nature of remakes inherently having the same skeleton of something else. That being said, even though Bring Her Back is conceptually not unheard of as a premise, it just feels different and it stands as its own thing. And that goes for both Talk to Me and Bring Her Back. The performances here, are just so strong. The Philippou brothers just love their unnerving, eerie moments coded around leads that have a lot of warmth and wholesomeness, and they meld these things together so well. Sally Hawkins had reportedly dropped out of returning in Paddington in Peru because she just wanted to explore her acting range and not be tied down to just one genre or style. And boy does she prove that she can go from cuddling with the most adorable British bear to being a conniving maniac. I do think it's funny though that the Paddington series and Bring Her Back have literally nothing in common outside of the fact that Sally Hawkins loves adopting kids and taking them under her wing at an alarming rate. It's very odd. And I'll go right out and say it, Kathy Bates is a beloved horror icon, but Sally Hawkins delivered a performance that would be in the same bracket in terms of psycho crazy lady. She finds the perfect blend of having warm, playful moments where you just can't help but smile and drop your guard. But then you also have unsettling, dark moments as well, which includes moments of her just being absolutely hateful. The way she's able to just slip into like 5 or 6 different masks of herself to be able to interact with anybody at a given time just so they don't see her true intentions and her real self. And there's possibly something to be said about that in itself. Perhaps she feels remorse or guilt of her loss because she might have been able to prevent it, but we don't really know the exact details of how the incident happened. And I like that there's no need to explain everything, because with what we feel during the movie, it's enough information to understand her motivations and her sadness. It's really tough to see this absolutely deranged, psychotic, manipulative monster also be this hollow shell of a mother that's broken and has just been irreversibly damaged. And watching this person, it's almost like you can't help but feel sorry for them despite all the damage they themselves have caused, because you know there's no happy ending for this frame of character. She's a very layered character that it's almost impossible not to feel sympathy for her even after knowing everything she's done. And even if you don't necessarily buy into her character, you buy into Sally's performance. It's fantastic. I also think the characters of Andy and Piper were perfectly written as siblings, specifically because you can tell how complicated their situation is, and you get whiffs of that throughout the movie. And yet you can see how much they love and care for each other. Piper as a sweet, innocent girl that is visually impaired both in movie and in real life is fantastic. She sells the ideal, lovable daughter that this movie needs so well, and I love that her bond with Andy is so strong that despite him being the protective brother, she is just as much of a support system for him as well. And anytime they said grapefruit to each other, I couldn't help but smile because of how endearing it was. Andy is probably both my favorite character and the most interesting character in the entire film. He starts off as this rebel, problem child trope, and you don't really know why at first. But at the same time, he's a good brother that looks out for his sister. And as the movie goes on, you can see how much this kid carries on his shoulders. There's angst, fear of showing too much, and fear of what he thinks is inevitable, because generational trauma is at play in this movie as well. And that leads to probably my favorite scene in the whole movie, where he has a heart-to-heart with Laura about his past. Despite the trauma of having an abusive father and him having a sense of resentment towards Piper, but also having the maturity to understand that Piper is not to blame, and he chooses to only show her love, despite making mistakes in the past that he clearly regrets. It's really good characterization. It's so good to the point that by the end his departure's so unexpected because you're so invested in his story that the rest of the third act suffers just because it's missing him. In terms of the effects and gore, it's the Philippou brothers. They know exactly how to get your skin to crawl in the darkest ways. And hell, they basically relish in absolutely mangling their characters on screen. It's interesting because I feel like we've been seeing a lot in the past decade of harming children on screen. What used to be a taboo is now somehow making itself a norm. I couldn't help but think about that during the movie. I can honestly see how people might make the same arguments that were made for Talk to Me, where you might feel like the lore and how vague the idea and instructions of the ritual are too nebulous and not explained enough or feel too thin. So therefore it could feel like plot convenience, but I don't know, just like Talk to Me, I feel like the details of how things work are just a means to an end. There's a lot of circular imagery in the film, and you could argue that it's symbolic of Laura feeling like she's in this bubble of grief that she can't get out of. But there's the use of drawing circles around the temple, but also if you use blood to create the circle, it enhances the strength of the spell, but even that's very vague. I just don't see the ritual as the crux of the story, because what hooked me was their stories, their tragedies, their emotions. To me, that was more than enough to keep me invested. So did I question the rules and the boundaries of this thing? Yes. Ambiguity by nature is always divisive, so depending on the day, the lack of knowing this information will worsen or better the experience of the movie. But at least for me, the rest of the story outweighs the weird inconsistencies towards the third act. And in this case, I'm okay with suspending my disbelief with the loose ends of the film. In fact, it's the other elements of the movie are what intrigued me much more, like the demon or spirit itself and its role in this whole thing. It's strange because part of me felt like the film took the approach of the spirit being forced to act. Like throughout most of the movie, Connor felt so neutral or nonchalant about the rest of the characters. And what made that most apparent for me was two moments. The first being when Piper walked in on him towards the end, when he had a clear opportunity to kill her and yet he just stood there idle. But because it wasn't compelled to do so, because it wasn't under the right circumstances, maybe it didn't act. But then again, later after the pool, it attacked her anyways, and that wasn't under the right circumstances, so that theory might not hold true just because of how vague it is. The other key moment was the ending, really, with it essentially walking out of the zone of entrapment voluntarily. Since it wasn't told to do so, it just voluntarily walked out of the circle. So I don't know, it was an interesting approach to the middleman use of the spirit. Personally, I do love a miserable movie, and this movie delivers. It's unapologetically bleak and relentlessly grim. Like, I compare the two party scenes from Talk to Me and Bring Her Back. Both parties are so different. Like in Talk to Me, you can tell that the energy is really high and it's just really light in mood. However, the party scene in Bring Her Back feels very artificial. Like you can tell these characters are not in the right headspace. So no matter how many smiles or party songs you have going on, you can tell that just something's very unsettling about that scene. I wouldn't say this is an outright con of the film, but simply because of how nihilistic the movie feels, especially when considering the movies that are evoked out of this, like Misery, Pet Sematary, Hereditary, and hell, even Sinister sprinkled in this. This isn't the type of movie that's gonna have mass appeal, and it's certainly not the type of movie that can be watched at any given time. This movie can easily be a trigger if you're not in the right headspace as well. That being said, it's still a strong movie because the ultimate goal of a movie outside of profiting is leaving a lasting impression and evoking a strong feeling. Both of which I think this movie fully succeeds at. Also, not really a pro nor a con, but I couldn't help but notice that this movie is very wet in general, like constant use of liquids, and it made me question how is that pool not full way before the third act. And this movie isn't without flaws. Unfortunately, because of how laser focused this movie is on sustaining that mood and unrelenting darkness, the third act becomes hard to defend in terms of making sense of it. Throughout the film, you understand Laura and her motivations, but she becomes so blinded by the fact that she thinks she's so close to achieving her goal that she had no actual plan of how she was gonna get away with any of it. She just devolves into an erratic mess, and it does become distracting when you realize the lengths that she'll go to get what she wants, for her to be immediately imprisoned after the fact, and again be in the same spot she started out in. I get and prefer the reading of just letting go of that and empathizing with her pain, because that's the main thing about the movie. But when the movie tells me that there's an accusation of a missing child potentially being being found and the cops only sending one person, and not even a trained cop at that, then it's hard not to see the problem. Especially with the fact that allegations are taken very seriously, so you can't honestly tell me that the police wouldn't treat it with urgency if there was the possibility of a missing child actually being alive, but being enslaved by a stranger, and expect me not to question that. Like I said before, the effects and the gore were absolutely amazing. The only thing is though that those moments felt like they were just forced and they weren't organically earned. Like, you have to have the characters do dumb decisions in order to set up the moments for gore. It's nitpicky, but it sticks out. Ultimately, I do think this is a strong movie, and even with the setbacks, I think if in the right headspace, you can enjoy the movie. I'm still certainly excited for whatever future projects the Philippou brothers inevitably end up working on. But that's it for me. I'd appreciate a thumbs up, subscribe, and sincerely yours, Anthony.